Alrighty, we have a very special guest here. Who goes by the name of Greg. Is it Soden or Soden? Actually,
Soden,
I don't know if I've Soden. Okay, I don't know if I've ever asked you that. And you see somebody's name's written down, and you think you know their name, and then all of a sudden it's about time to say their name, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I'm about to go into this, and I might mess up.
Yeah, it's so funny. I do another podcast besides the Propagandhi one, and I'm always talking to professors. And before I hit record, I'm always like, "Tell me how to say your name exactly correct." Mm-hmm. And then I hit record, and I immediately say it, so that if I only say it once, I am fresh on the pronunciation right off the bat. So that's my little inside baseball for starting off my interviews too.
Yeah, and when I recorded my audiobook, it was funny how many times I came across a name and I was like, okay, wait a minute. I don't know how to say this name. And then, I worked with an engineer. Sometimes he'd be like, oh yeah, that's this. And then he'd be like, I have no idea how to say that name either. And then we would have to take like 5 minutes and Google it and see if it was a common enough name to figure out. And if it wasn't, we had to like just take a stab at it and sort of reach consensus. And because there's so many names in my book, that happened a lot. It ate up so much time. It wasn't something I even expected to have to even worry about on my audiobook, but it's just the trials and tribulations of recording an audiobook.
Whenever I run into that problem, what I tend to do is go on YouTube and see if I can find an interview with that person that already exists, because you can usually find somebody else somewhere saying it, but if you can't, oh my gosh, it's stressful. That leads to a little spiral for me.
Yeah. So, Greg, we are here. I wanted to talk to you about your book. We first met because you reached out to me to do your podcast, Unscripted Moments. You found out about me and my work because of the excerpt, I think, from the Ska Sucks chapter on Punk News. Is that how you found out about me?
Correct. Somebody sent it to me on my old Propagandhi podcast social medias, and I read it and I really loved it, and I found you and reached out just the old-fashioned way via email, I think, and you were very kind to do it. I think you were really excited about any opportunities that were coming your way to help promote in Defense of Ska, and I was really delighted because the name of the Propagandhi song Ska Sucks is right there on the cover, so I felt like it was a really good fit to have you on the show.
It was really great interview opportunity for me, because I think anytime when you're doing a book or project, you get an opportunity to take one specific element of your project and hyper focus on it. I think that's better. I mean, it's always nice to just like have somebody who says, I'm interested in your book and we're going to do like an overview and discuss whatever kind of comes to mind. But when someone's like, you wrote this one specific chapter about this one specific topic, one, maybe the whole book's not really of interest to my audience, but this one little singular topic is, so let's really hone in on that. So those are a lot more fun to do, I think.
Yeah, it was a blast. And I think it came out of what I thought was going to be a bonus episode, but then we went on to do 3 or 4 more Ska Sucks episodes, and then I compiled them all into one 6+ hour long episode that features you, Adam, and then there's also our original Ska Sucks episode, and then Danny from Against All Authority and Dave from Big D and the Kids Table. So the Ska Sucks lore within Propagandhi really snowballed because of your book and all the covers that exist out there. And I'm just excited that it's all done and out there in the world that people can find. It's pretty fun project we've been involved with the last couple of years over here.
So you have this book out, also called Unscripted Moments, that is interviews taken from your podcast. Ska Sucks is not in there because you're focusing on members of the band, but I think what we're talking about with Ska Sucks relates to your podcast and the book. And then I think in the world of Propagandhi, there's generally more than meets the eye. Like Ska Sucks, Ska Sucks is a song that a lot of people who grew up in the 90s know because it just appeared to be making fun of ska, which was popular and stuff in the 90s. But the song really came from such a deeper place than just like, let's make fun of ska. And while that story is specifically interesting, it's just like kind of how Propagandhi songs are in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're like onions where there's the layers, and when you start peeling them back, you never really know what you're going to find. And that's why some of our episodes on the podcast have wound up being 5 hours long, because the layers just get so deep that it's kind of hard to stop talking about them.
Mm-hmm. So that's I think is an interesting thing about your podcast, is like there are a lot of podcasts out there that exist to say like, oh yeah, we are, we're hyper fans of this band, so we're going to break down their songs. And I think you said in your book that David Anthony's podcast about Alkaline Trio was an inspiration. Yeah. And while Alkaline Trio is a great band, I don't know that you need the same level of research to break down their songs as you do a Propagandhi song.
Right. Yeah, their episodes are 30 minutes, and that's originally what I thought mine was going to be. And David was one of our earliest guests, and the episode that David is on, it's like an hour and a half. So immediately out of the gate in our earliest episodes, we were eclipsing his episode lengths by triple. So it really just kind of snowballed out of hand. The entire project has just been out of hand since almost day one. And that's why there's a book now too, because it got so out of hand that I wanted to continue seeing how out of hand it could get for to the extreme level,
And it's not just that you were doing long episodes too. I think it's the level of research that you would do to prepare for an episode.
Yeah.
Is probably way more than they needed to do for Alkaline Trio. And that's because, a Propagandhi song might reference a book. It might reference a movement. It might reference something that if you understand all the reference material, it'll be better for you to understand the song. So it's not just the song. It's like everything, the layers underneath the song are, I think, and that's where you really dig into with Propagandhi, which is the right way to do Propagandhi.
Yeah, I mean, we have 6 Google Docs from the last 5+ years of making the episodes, and each Google Doc is 500 to 600 pages long. So we have thousands of pages of notes that we've compiled since spring of 2020 about every individual song that the band has put out, every single interview outline, every single source that we've ever found, every single piece of commentary, all of our notes, they're all in there. And it's hundreds upon hundreds of pages that maybe someday I'll just like put those links open up onto the world. But those are just pure craziness that is just my ranting and raving in a way that's really only decipherable to me and the other co-hosts of the show. But yeah, the book is like 300 something pages long, and the notes for the show are thousands of pages.
Do you know, for the podcast, not the book, do you know for the podcast which episode you spent the most time researching to prepare for? The most reading the most books, doing the most pre-interviews, whatever it is you needed to do to be ready for the content of that episode?
Yeah, no question. I've got a few of them that were specifically intense, and the first one that springs to mind is the track 1 from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. The song is called Mate Ka Maurice Akun Rasikan, which is a song about East Timor and some of the resistance movements within East Timor in their struggle against the Philippines. And that was a very difficult episode. We had to do a lot of research about, Suharto, the Suharto regime, among other things. And then another one would be the standoff at Kanesatake, which happened in the summer of 1990 in Quebec, just outside of Montreal. It's colloquially known as the Oka Crisis, and it kind of captivated the hearts and minds of Canadians for the entire summer of 1990, where the community of Oka wanted to expand a golf course on some traditional First Nations lands, and there was a massive standoff against the Mohawk in Quebec, and it was a really, really big deal, and we really just wanted to make sure we got that right. So those two songs in particular stand out to me as some of the ones that we put tremendous amounts of work into. Weeks and weeks of work went into them, and we were constantly making several episodes at the same time, but some of our episodes took us 6 months to make. It's just that they were sandwiched in between other episodes that were maybe a little less intense. I always had several on the go at the same time, so the really, really intense ones are kind of spaced out, and then some of the easier ones, and when I say easy, I mean still very difficult, but less difficult than the other ones, where they were all kind of spaced out in between. But yeah, those are two of the ones that stand out to me as being exceptionally difficult.
So each of those songs, for instance, you could have written an entire book based off of the research you did and everything you gleaned from those two songs.
Oh, absolutely. Countless books exist on those historical events as well. So you can go down the route. I've got books about East Timor sitting on my bookshelf 5 feet away from me right now that I got in preparation for that. And I almost took it even farther and invited some of those authors to do interviews about just doing those books, but it just kind of didn't get that far because I had so many other projects in the works, but it easily could have. I could have started a Propagandhi discography, bibliography side podcast where I just interview people who wrote books about the topics that I had to research to talk about these episodes. I mean, it was just completely bananas.
So when you decided to do this book, the decision you went with is that you wanted to highlight interviews that were with band members of Propagandhi. Mm-hmm. What led to that decision, as opposed to just taking like some of these like super in-depth academic episodes, for instance?
It's so wild that so many of the interviews in the book could be a part 2, basically. Maybe someday I'll do some kind of like thing where I pull my favorite interviews with like historians and scholars and authors who wrote a lot of the stuff, and we did interview many of them. That could be seriously a part 2. I don't foresee it being like a print physical book, with a publisher, but it could be like an ebook, or something like that you could get for your Kindle. But the ones with the band were specifically interesting because it is a 5-year period of time from when the world shuts down in the COVID-19 pandemic all the way through the release of their new record, which was spaced out 8 years from the 2017 LP to the 2025 LP. Mm-hmm. So it's this snapshot of time where humanity went through this very specific period of time where there was no live music, and a lot of people were feeling very reflective about their lives in the arts up until that point. Up until the release of their brand new record and the world kind of like resuming a sense of normalcy, and I say normalcy with a massive, massive asterisk here, because what is normal compared to 2017? We live in an entirely different world. So this collection, it just seemed to be so wide-ranging with past and present members of the band that it was like this standalone thing that I felt deserved to be commemorated in some way. Like people out there listening may know the collected interviews of Punk Planet, a book, I think it's called We Owe You Nothing by Dan Sinker. Mm-hmm. And that's an interviews collection as well. And it's Q&A style, and it's got photographs, and it's got introduction blurbs for every chapter. And I was thinking, man, I've got these 20 plus interviews with Propagandhi members. Wouldn't it be neat if it was available in a very limited form for whoever wants it to look just like this? And so We Owe You Nothing by Dan Sinker was 100% the model that I was shooting for. And, hearing John K. Sampson, who left the band 29 years ago, talk about his reflections on how to clean everything and less talk, more rock, and then also talk about what his music has been like these days, all in one conversation, was very special. And hearing Todd tell stories about joining, about his bands before Propagandhi, about Propagandhi's earliest tours and joining them, Very special. And then seeing the relationship in comments where Chris and Jord, who formed Propagandhi, see those conversations play off of each other throughout the several that I include with each of them, it just felt like it could be really special. And I really have put so much work into this podcast. I feel like I could have gotten 2 PhDs in the amount of time that I spent doing this podcast. And I wish that that was an exaggeration, but I went through 2 years of a PhD program about a decade ago, and I worked far harder on this podcast and book than I ever did in anything related to graduate school. So, I don't know. It's just like when you work on something so hard, you want it to be more than just a thing of digital files, that if I stop paying for the hosting website someday, it all disappears without a trace.
Yeah.
And I really just wanted to do something special, even if it's just one thing, and even if only 100 people ever got it, I just wanted it to exist in a physical form so that my kid, when I'm dead someday, she could pull it off of her bookshelf and be like, oh, this is what my dad was doing when he was at his computer for months. Here's a thing that he did, and I can hold it instead of just being like, oh, he did a podcast. You know what I mean? Like when you,
sure, yeah.
Like your podcast in Defense of Ska, hundreds of episodes, incredible output, insane amounts of work, but it's a lot of digital files. Tell me it's not different when you hold the first and second edition of your book. You know, there's no question how that compares, how that tactile and tangible thing feels compared to when you scroll through the Apple Podcasts selections, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you can have it on your bookshelf, but I mean, you can't do that with a podcast.
I know.
Yet.
I know. Well, part of this is how crazy I am. You want to hear my complete delusion? Yeah. I actually pondered getting WAV files of every interview with the band and sending them to a vinyl pressing place and doing an interview LP box set where I pressed all of the interviews with members of the band as like an LP box set, and I make like 10 copies, and I just have it for like the co-hosts and people who have worked heavily on the show, being like, hey, here's this 13 LP box set that cost me $400 to make. Here you go. That I actually pondered doing that whenever I was toying around ideas of doing this book. Is like, what if it's an LP box set? Like, that's how crazy I am and how ridiculous my thoughts and feelings are about this project. I'm always like, what's next?
All right, here's an alternate pitch.
Yeah.
Audiobook for your book, hire actors to play you, to play the various members of the band, to play your co-hosts. Amazing. Let's make it happen.
I think that would be so amazing. I don't know how much the publisher would be interested in doing that, because I presume they own the rights. I mean, I presume if an audiobook could exist, it would be through them. So what if? But it could happen in theory.
Well, I will say this, and we got to get back to like this is just for you and I, even though I'm not going to edit this out.
Yeah.
I published my book with Clash, an independent book publisher, great people. Yeah. My contract stipulated that I own the rights to my audiobook. They were not involved at all with the audiobook. I made a whole separate contract with a different company to do the audiobook. So you might have a similar arrangement. So just look at your contract.
Dude, that is so cool. So I bought a copy of your book on Audible. So when I did that, that was like an author-friendly deal for you because you own the rights to the audiobook. Well, yeah. I own 3 copies of your book, man. I own the audiobook, the first edition, and the second edition. So I am in Defense of Ska expert over here because I've consumed all 3 editions.
PhD in Propagandhi, but you got an AA in Defense of Ska.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Perfect. I love it. So, I'll check it out because you never know, You never know.
Yeah. So something that you said a few times in the book in regards to having the book focus on the band members and as your subject is that you really liked getting kind of like a different side of the band, like and specifically you stated multiple times that the band, because they're so political and they're so involved in activism, that in a way, they're kind of more known for their politics and their activism, and the interviews they do tend to revolve around that. But in a lot of the interviews that you did, you're really kind of seeing a little bit more of their personal life, their hobbies. They're sort of like, even kind of what they're like stepping aside from the political nature of the band.
Yeah, I prefer it that way. There are so many amazing interviews that already exist with the band where they talk about heavily political things. Like Jord was very active in Partners in Health and stuff revolving Haiti relief and things like that for years and years. And they've done some really great interviews out there that are heavily political and issue oriented. But I just wanted to hang out more, you know? Mm-hmm. I didn't want to punish them. I wanted them to enjoy what they were doing and being on the podcast. And so I talked to them about guitar building, and I talked to them about music that inspired them, that they covered in their 40 years as a band. Why did you choose these cover songs? I asked them stories about late 80s and early 90s Winnipeg. I asked them songs about their other musical projects. I had Todd and his brother on an episode together, and I published his brother's commentary in the book as well, because they were in the interview together talking about what it was like to grow up together, and Todd's life in music and his brother Kent's life in academia. And so I really loved the multidimensional aspect of the topics. That wasn't just politically punishing, because there's so much more. Every person is so much more than just their political orientation and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted there to be a fuller, more human aspect to it beyond their life, just in activism.
So the first interview in the book, which I believe is the first interview that you did for the podcast, was with Chris and ayahuasca and sort of the effects it have. Is that the very first time you ever interviewed Chris Hanna?
No, it isn't. There should be. Let me just scroll through the book while I'm telling this story. In 2009, I was in graduate school at the University of Saskatchewan, and I was writing little goofy articles for the University of Saskatchewan student newspaper called The Sheaf, and I wore a Propagandhi t-shirt to a writers' meeting one day. And the editor said, "Hey, Propagandhi is coming to town." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I already have a ticket." They're like, "Oh, do you want to interview them for the paper?" I was like, yeah. So in 2009, I actually interviewed Chris backstage at Louis' Pub in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan for the student newspaper. And I actually put a QR code on page 338 in the book that takes you to the existing to this day article that I wrote about the band. So I told the band that I did this interview years and years ago. Obviously, they didn't remember it because things blur together over the years. But the interview about ayahuasca was not my first encounter with Chris. The first one is a lost to time recording that was on my white MacBook plastic computer in 2009.
Very nice. It is an interesting, the ayahuasca interview is an interesting introduction to Chris and anyone in the band. When you're a fan of Propagandhi, just to kind of let's hear from the band. And this is kind of the first experience that your podcast listeners are getting. Is there a reason why you went for that one as your first one?
Yeah, it is. There is. He does these great podcast episodes on his Patreon. His Patreon is called A Catastrophic Break with Consensus Reality. And everybody can find it at patreon.com/JesusHChris. And it's a great Patreon. It's his output is slow, but it's always worth it, just like Propagandhi's music. He works in a similar fashion with his podcast. But he did a two-part episode about the song Duplicate Keys, Acaro, from the Failed States LP. And it was a narrative where he told the story of what it was like to attend ayahuasca ceremonies with groups of people in Winnipeg and what it did for his life. And so I had so many follow-up questions. And the Propagandhi podcast was in development at the time. So I told him about that. I was like, hey, we're thinking about doing a podcast about your band. He's like, oh, okay. And I think he was a little taken aback by that. And then I have another podcast called Classical Ideas Podcast, where I talk to scholars, historians, etc., about the history of religion in the world, and ayahuasca being a ceremonial practice in South America. And this guy that I looked up to, having very clearly told the story in his own podcast, I was like, man, can we just talk about that for a Classical Ideas podcast? And he's like, yeah, sure. And then when Unscripted Moments, the podcast about Propagandhi, started coming into shape, I was like, hey, can I put that ayahuasca interview we did for Classical Ideas on that podcast? And he's like, yeah, sure. So it got double posted, but I think it's like episode 150 or 59 or something like that on Classical Ideas podcast. Is like this original conversation I did with Chris. But it's a weird start to the book because we throw you in immediately and you're talking about ayahuasca. And my mom was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe your book's out. And I was like, yeah, good first chapter. And she read it, and I was like, hey, what'd you think about that chapter about drugs opening the book? And I think she was a little taken aback, but she had a good sense of humor about it. But yeah, the fact that it starts with that, I went purely in chronological order. If I would have known that this would ever become a book someday, I probably would have started in a different way. But this is a snapshot of exactly how Unscripted Moments, a podcast with Propagandhi, occurred in the sequence that it occurred. So the chapters start talking to each other throughout the book, but doing ayahuasca is a kind of a funny and hilarious hook to the book, if you ask me.
Yeah, because I think if you pick up this book thinking like, oh, I want to get the complete story of biography of Propagandhi, it's not exactly what you're going to get.
Right. Yeah, it's not. And so some publishers who were interested in this project told me that they wanted me to do that, and I know my limitations and my capabilities, and I knew I was going to fail if I went that route. I knew it would never come out. My attention span is about 15 seconds. And I knew that it would never happen if I tried to do like the complete oral history of Propagandhi, or a version like your book. I knew it would never, ever, ever see the light of day. But this version, I envisioned it from day one being this, and I found somebody that believed in this format, so that's why it is the way that it is.
I want to talk about some of the songs that were covered in some of your, your personal kind of relationship with the songs and the conversations you had and how those affected you. One of them you talked about is Woe Is Me, and how you felt surprised during the interview of how you thought it was going to be kind of a more lighthearted conversation, but it ended up being one a little bit more emotionally impactful to you than you expected. Can you kind of talk on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So Woe Is Me is a song that came out on a split 10-inch on Recess Records in 1994 between Propagandhi and I Spy. I Spy featured Todd Kowalski, who now is in Propagandhi. But this Woe Is Me song is about friendship and, mistakes within friendships that people make. And here I was thinking I was just going to be talking about this throwaway song, and then all of a sudden I'm having these deep memories from like middle school and high school bubbling to the surface about friends that I used to have that I no longer have, or friends that I had who died super young and prematurely, or friends that I wronged and that I hurt through selfishness and youthful mistakes, and how I ruined friendships, and how I wondered what my life would be like today if I hadn't done those things, if I hadn't ruined those mistakes, if I hadn't damaged those friendships. And so Woe Is Me, I remember talking to Keith, and I was like, hey, we need to do, Keith being my co-host at the time, I was like, I'm so drained, we need to do an easy episode. Can because we'd been talking about so many heavy songs. And he's like, oh, yeah, we'll do that one from I'd Rather Be Flag Burning. Woe is me. And I was like, oh, yeah, Utter Crap Song. He's like, yeah, that one. And then we wound up having this insanely deep conversation that was so emotionally heavy. And I'm so glad that one of the members of the band, David Gillis, who used to play guitar for Propagandhi from 2006 to 2014, he chose that song. And it was a beautiful conversation about a song that is completely forgotten, and the band would like Chris from Propagandhi would probably be like, "Ooh, that song, gross." But it just shows you the depth and the power of so many of the ideas in the band, that songs that the band today would probably be like, "Ooh, I can't believe you're talking about that one," wound up being so impactful and emotional, and digging up so many memories for myself from decades ago that I had completely forgotten, hadn't thought about for years.
Another song, and this touches on not just your relationship with Propagandhi, but a lot of their fans' relationship. You know, how these songs are very personal, or some of the songs are extremely personal. They're Refusing to Be a Man is a song that you talk about being something that really had a huge impact on you, and your relationship to society, and how you view yourself as a man, and what it means to be a man in today's society, and everything wrong with that.
Yeah, Refusing to Be a Man, if anybody doesn't know, that is a book that Propagandhi named a song after, and the book was written by a second-wave feminist author named John Stoltenberg. And it's a great book. It's a great read to this day. I found a copy. It's long out of print, and it's super expensive, but I managed to find a copy online in like half.com or something for something like $20 when I was making that episode. And I actually read it, and it's very, very powerful, talking about the ways that feminism, being a misogynist, and being not on board with feminism, and not on board with women's liberation, is harming men, and how it harms us from fulfilling our own potential in the world, because all we're doing is we're stifling the progress of half of society, because we refuse to see ways that we can improve our own relationships with the women in our lives. So really, really powerful song. I didn't really understand what that song meant for many years. I got it on a very surface level, but for many, many years, I was just your very average, complete moron, walking around in the world, just completely clueless about anything involving sexism and patriarchy, and the actual visible ways that is visible in our society, through every aspect of society, whether it's an uneven division of labor in the household, or wage gaps in the workplace. And this song is my entry point, 100% my entry point into thinking about those things, and thinking how I can be a better partner to a woman, a better father to a woman, a better friend to women in general. And it is 100% Propagandhi's doing that. They brought those ideas into my world. And if they hadn't ever named a book or a song called Refusing to Be a Man after that book, I never would have read the book. And it would have always just remained some kind of surface level thing. But I eventually tracked the book down, and I'm so glad that I did.
It's such an interesting discussion, because I feel like as society, as we go back and forth trying to progress, I feel like oftentimes the conversation is like, as a man or as a white person, you should be anti-racist and you should be anti-sexist because it's good for society. And it's almost like, while that's true, like, it's also good for you. And that the fact that it's good for you seems to me like it would be greater motivation for people to pursue these ways of thinking than I want to make society better, because it's hard. We're self-motivated. And if being anti-sexist makes you have a better experience as a man. You know, if you, for instance, if you have to be a certain way as a man, then you limit your experience. You can't be emotional. You can't be vulnerable. I mean, you actually miss out on a lot of experiences in life. You have to be this narrow idea of a male. Yeah. But if you're anti-sexist, then you actually expand your own experience and what you can be as yourself. So I think, to some degree, we win the fight of making society more equal and more progressive by explaining how it's good for everybody.
Oh, yeah. And I have an example from just today. Several years ago, I wouldn't have been capable of being like, wow, I feel really bad today. I'm not having a good time today. And I need a little bit of grace. But just today, this morning, I woke up and I just was having a bad morning. I felt bad. I was in a bad mood. I didn't sleep great. And I turned to my partner and I was like, wow, I am really struggling this morning. I need to shake it off. I need to think about some of the positive things I got coming up. And we had this nice little, what I consider to be a nice little vulnerable moment. And I'm sure I had like such a black rain cloud over my head that maybe she perceived it differently than I did. But I was like, okay, I'm being vulnerable. I'm expressing that I feel badly. I am looking to reframe by focusing on some positive things that are coming up in the next couple of days, in an effort to kind of let this bad feeling, just acknowledge it, say, hello, I'm not feeling great. I'm acknowledging it. And I'm not brooding in silence like I would have done 5-6 years ago. I'm not sitting there punishing her with my emotional withdrawnness, or if that's the correct word. I'm not punishing her with my emotionally immature lack of ability to communicate. And so obviously that's always a work in progress, and we can always become better communicators. But because of this song, I could trace my ability this morning to say I'm having not a great time. I don't feel very good today. I want to shake it off and I want to focus on some positive things. I could trace being able to just have that exact little interaction back to something like this song, and it does enhance my experience as a man, because I was able to say that to her, and she loves me and I love her. And it was a really nice little moment being like, I can communicate. I have grown, and I can tie it back to this song. So that's kind of a cool, a little example just from today that I just experienced a few hours ago.
Nice. Another song I want to talk about, because of it ties to your own experience, is "Fuck the Border."
Yeah.
You talk about your experience teaching in Mexico, and your ideas about what immigration is and who immigrants are, and how that really changed through going to Mexico. I'm not sure how the song tied in. You might want to comment on that as well.
Yeah. So Fuck the Border from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes is a very interesting song because it talks about the experiences of migrant workers moving around wherever, right? It's a very great song, and it's a very catchy song. Everybody can chant, fuck the border, and it's just like, it's super fun. It's a jam, man, and it goes hard live every time. And the song is just a staple in Propagandhi's catalog at this point. However, when I was growing up, I lived in St. Louis, Missouri, in the suburbs, in a 99.7% white community, 20 minutes outside of downtown St. Louis. I had cable TV in a lily white suburb, and I went to a high school that had, it was a suburban high school that was very well off. And I lived so far away from a border, right? When you're in Missouri, you're in the middle of the United States. There's no border for 1,000 miles in any direction, at least. And so I had no experience of what it was like to go in and out of other countries. When I was in 9th grade, I went to England on a trip, and I kind of got the bug, right? Being like, wow, what else is out there? I went on a school trip, one of those EF tours that kids do. I was so lucky to have a family that sent me there, because it changed the trajectory of my entire life. And I was like, oh my God, I want to go as many places as possible now. And then when I was in college, I was studying to become a teacher, and everybody was trying to teach in either St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, or Springfield, or Joplin, one of the big metro centers of the state itself. And I went to this international teaching job fair in Iowa, where hundreds of principals from around the world come and recruit teachers to staff their bilingual English language schools. And I was 22, and I went through 17 job interviews, round-robin style job interviews in 2.5 or 3 days. And I took the only one that was offered to me in a city called Torreon, Mexico, in the state of Coahuila, which is a couple hours to the west of Monterrey, Mexico. So it's in the north of Mexico in the Chihuahuan Desert. And I moved to a place where, as a 6'4" suburban white boy from the U.S. who spoke no Spanish whatsoever, to teach in this school. And, you know, the border agents at the airport were like, who are you? What's going on? And I'm like, in my stupid, moronic worldview, I answered them fully in English. And then the staff from the school came to the airport and rescued me. But it gave me that experience of migration, right? And it gave me the experience of what it felt like to be completely clueless at all times with no idea what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And it was the greatest year of growth imaginable for me, I think. Living somewhere that was completely unfamiliar, totally different language. I would walk down the street and I would stand out like a sore thumb. Every single person who would drive by me on the street would never in a million years think that I was from there. And it just gave me that experience of, it built empathy within me for people who move around the world. And I wasn't forced to move anywhere. Fortunately, I chose to do so, and I had the liberty of leaving at any time, but I lived there for a whole year. And, I got more comfortable over time, but when the end of my contract came, I got on a plane and I left. But it really solidified the sense of empathy for people who move around the world, and oftentimes people who move around the world because they were forced to because of, things like genocides and war crimes and extreme violence and climate catastrophe. I experienced none of those negative aspects, but it gave me this teeny tiny little snapshot of what it feels like to be completely uncomfortable going somewhere else. And that's what that song means to me personally. And that's why it connects so much with me, because I fully realize that I don't know the full range of experiences of what it's like to emigrate. But in my migration stories, it was hard the whole time. And I lived in England, and moving there was hard. And I lived in Canada, and moving there was hard. And there I spoke the language, and I largely didn't stand out. And those experiences were hard anyway, because migrating is hard, no matter what. Yeah. Migrating from one state to another within the U.S. is hard. And this song... and having those experiences and connecting those experiences for me personally just helped me build some empathy.
So you, Supporting Cast is your favorite Propagandhi record?
By far, yes.
And this is, what year is that record? It's a later record.
2009, yep. And it's their first record after leaving Fat Records, their longtime record label.
Now, you're an advocate for later era Propagandhi. What is it about the later years that you feel like is really good about the band, or maybe they developed into?
Well, the earlier stuff is obviously, I think, is great. I love How to Clean Everything. I love Let's Talk More Rock. But it's when they became a more metallic band on Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, their third LP. When that sound shifted from being more of the hooky punk rock into more of a metallic, thrashy feel that pushed the envelope regarding tempos and time signatures. When they had a member change from John K. Sampson to Todd Kowalski, I just am more oriented toward the heavier stuff, right? It's just kind of how I roll as a person. Like, I really love heavier music just in general. I listen to a lot of power metal in the car. I listen to a lot of like goth metal, like Unto Others and Typo Negative. I grew up listening to tons of metal, like Metallica and Tool and like Pantera and all this stuff that American white metal boys listen to. And so that stuff, with that sensibility of the more complex riffs, the more little funky time signatures, that stuff, it really spoke to me. And then I thought that when Propagandhi added a fourth member via a second guitar, it added another layer of dimension. And Supporting Cast is their first LP with two guitars, and it just feels so atmospheric to have that extra oomph within it. And then I also think that Supporting Cast is just their pound for pound, their best batch of songs on one LP.
So the songs that were chosen for this book really are like, they reflect the interviews you did with the band members. So they're not necessarily any sort of specific collection of songs otherwise.
Correct. Yeah, it's completely random because of what happened over the years based on what I needed to talk to the band about, right? So, for example, early on, those were all songs chosen by members of the band. Tertium Non Dater was chosen by Sue Lin. The Only Good Fascist was chosen by Sue Lin. Cut Into the Earth was chosen by Dave. Dark Matters was chosen by Todd's brother, Kent. Woe's Me was chosen by David. Purina Hall of Fame was chosen by Sue Lin. So you go through the first half of the book, and you'll see that there's like one individual song that was really latched onto. And then as the book goes on, it kind of branches out a little bit, right? Like, I have a really long interview with Chris where we talk about his record that he did for his Patreon, where he just did reimagined Propagandhi songs with local Winnipeg musicians, and also a batch of covers. Like, he covered Iron Maiden, he covered Voivod, he covered SNFU. So it branches out. And then we talked about writing and touring, and then John Sampson and I had a very it's just called A Conversation with John Sampson, because we talked about a lot of stuff. So the earlier part of the book really follows the podcast format, and then as the book goes on, you see the podcast branch out a little bit, where I'm talking to Chris about 9 songs in one interview. I'm talking to Jord about 3 cover songs in one interview. I'm talking to David for an hour about what it's like to build guitars and teach yourself how to build guitars in your basement workshop. So the first half of the book really reflects the purpose of the podcast, where they came on to talk about a song. The second half of the book really kind of branches out to talk about a more wide variety of topics in the chapters.
So, just a side question then. Do you have a song? You already communicated your favorite Propagandhi album by far. Do you have a favorite Propagandhi song that stands above the rest, or is the most meaningful to you?
Yeah. Well, Supporting Cast, the title track on Supporting Cast, is my favorite Chris Hanna song on any Propagandhi LP. So track 2 on that record, I would classify as my favorite Propagandhi song ever. And my favorite Todd Kowalski song is called Cut Into the Earth. It's from 2005's Potemkin City Limits LP. And that is also reflected in the book in chapter 4. But I don't talk to Todd about it. I talk to David Gillis, their second guitar player, about that song. So with this band, with having multiple songwriters, I almost feel like it's unfair to say that my favorite Propagandhi song is with this one thing, when you have multiple songwriters who have such different sensibilities. And then if we're really going to the full extent of Propagandhi songwriters, I will say that my favorite John Sampson song is Gifts from Less Talk More Rock. So those are my 3 favorite Propagandhi songs by 3 different singers that have been in the band.
Is there anything about any of those songs that that go beyond just the sound of the song? Is there any like personal connection to either any of those three songs that make them stand up so high above for you, or is it just that they sound good?
It's just the ones that make I think that make the hair on my arm stand up the most.
Mm-hmm.
Those are ones that like supporting cast. My favorite. This is going to sound so ridiculous, but my favorite moment in the entire Propagandhi discography is at 1 minute and 48 seconds into the song Supporting Cast, where Chris whispers, yes. And then they go back into this riff that is so perfect and fast and heavy and just, it's got this unbelievable riff, and I've heard it 1,000 times, and it's my favorite moment in it. My favorite 5 seconds in their entire catalog is on that song. So these three selections, and then I think the Cut Into the Earth is their most impressively performed song. The lyrics are very mysterious in Cut Into the Earth, and I talked about that a lot in the episode that we made about that song. A lot of it is about migration, like I talked about on the Fuck the Border question you asked me a little bit ago. Cut Into the Earth is about something similar, and so that's why I connect so deeply to that song. And I think that the intro, where it's in these really, it's very jazzy, it's very odd time signatures, it's so unbelievably musically impressive, that's why that one stands out to me. So yeah, it's a mixture of just totally like shallow level stuff, being like, whoa, I love when he's like, yes, and then they riff really hard and they go super fast. But yeah, those are my three favorites. Yeah. And it's kind of a mixture between the music and the words, but I think the Gifts is the best John Samson song in Propagandhi's early years too. So those are my three choices.
I wanted to make a side comment too. You brought up Chris's Patreon several times. I keep meaning to comment on this.
Sure.
You directed me to Chris's Patreon because one of his first episodes, I think it was episode 2, right? Where it was technically about Haile Selassie up your ass.
Yep.
But he talks about Ska Sucks too, because there's a kind of a connection with those two songs where these are both songs that are on that record, How to Clean Everything, and he kind of has mixed feelings about the legacies of these songs and some of like where it was coming from at the time, and they overlap a little bit. So you directed me to this. I signed up to the Patreon, and this gave me a lot of backstory and deeper information for Ska Sucks that I was able to use for the second edition of my book that I didn't have for the first edition, because I was never able to interview Chris, and I had to kind of piecemeal like information and stuff. And while I did try to get him to interview with me, he didn't. However, he did give me authorization to use anything I wanted from that specific Patreon episode. So I was able to quote him talking about Ska Sucks and everything around it from that episode. So
man.
It was very interesting.
Dude, you have no idea. I was crossing my fingers so hard for you for the Ska Sucks Chris Hanna episode on In Defense of Ska, and it's a tragedy. And if he ever agrees to it, you have to bring the podcast back just for that one episode.
So Chris, if you're listening, we will bring the podcast back if you just do an episode of In Defense of Ska.
Oh my God, I know, and like I really tried. He's elusive, isn't he? It's like it's really funny. He and Jord and John Samson, very elusive. And it's amazing that I was able to talk to Jord twice and Chris several times because, as you know, it's not easy to nail them down. And
you.
We were talking about Haile Selassie. Sorry, let's go back to that.
No, yeah. Well, I just wanted to point that out. That was this Patreon that you mentioned a few times actually went into improving the Ska Sucks chapter of my second edition, which I think is interesting because it really kind of shows the level of depth that Chris gets into on his own podcast when he's reflecting and giving backstories for these songs.
Yeah.
My final question for you is another little overlap area is you briefly mentioned the band Random Hand in your book, who's our UK ska punk band. Although you refer to him as a punk band with a trombone
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah.
Can you explain how Random Hand makes a cameo in your Propagandhi book?
Yes. So this is interesting. Another quick question. You had Frank Turner in for an interview, right? At one time?
Yes. And you've had him on your podcast, yeah.
So I had Frank Turner on my podcast, and during the Frank Turner interview that I was doing with him, Frank and I discovered that we were both at a show that Propagandhi did at the Islington Academy in Islington, which is a neighborhood in London, on the supporting cast tour. I brought it up. I said, oh, yeah, I saw Propagandhi in England twice, and blah, blah. I was at this show, and I was at this show, and Frank's like, oh, yeah, I was at the Islington one. And so Frank and I were standing in the same room watching Propagandhi at the same time. Random Hand was the opener for like these 5 dates in England.
Mm-hmm.
So I walk in, and I'm with my friend, and then Random Hand comes out and plays a set, and I was really impressed. Their singer, Robin Leach, I believe is his name, is so good, so charismatic on stage, and then he's just going at it, and then he busts out this trombone and he just starts wailing on it. I was like, this dude is awesome. So I bought a Random Hand album. I think it's called Inhale, Exhale. Does that sound right to you?
Mm-hmm.
So I bought that album at the show. But yeah, I saw Random Hand open for Propagandhi. And the chapter that they appear in is chapter 8, where I talk with drummer George Samoleski. And we were just chatting about sometimes I had seen them, and the conversation just kind of drops right in. What's that term? In medias res, in the middle of the action. I kind of hit record when Jordan and I were in the middle of a conversation, and I just kind of left it as is. So Random Hand just appears right off the bat in that interview, which I thought was really funny, because that was the only time I've ever seen them. I haven't kept up with them a ton. I think they're still a band.
They are, yeah. And
have had varying degrees of success in the UK. But I loved them. I thought they were super heavy, but then they would bust out these these ska stuff. Like, they reminded me of like what I liked about Link 80, where they were super heavy, but they would just bust out these fabulous horn parts. So that's what I liked about Random Hand.
Yeah, that scene. So Frank Turner, he was, as a kid or as a younger person, he grew up like watching that scene. It's kind of more of an early 2000s scene where there was this ska punk scene that happened in England. Random Hand, Cap Down, Lightyear. Those bands got pretty big in England. They never really had any impact here in the States. See,
I don't know any of those other two. I only know Random Hand. Of that 3 that you listed, I'd never heard the other 2 at all. Never even heard those names. So
those, because I mean, they just were. It was a very like homegrown sort of scene. And Link 80, oddly, you brought them up. They would tour in England, and they connected really well with that scene. So they would play with those bands, like I think like Link 80 and Big D. There was a few like state bands from the States that played in England a lot and really connected with those bands, I think, because there was a sonic similarity and their fans liked them.
Oh yeah, like that. Man, that Joey Bustos super fast drum beat, man, that heavy stuff with ska mixed in. I am a huge sucker for that sound. Huge. It's like the fact that Omnigon exists, like you're wearing an Omnigon shirt, like the fact that Omnigon exists and they're doing that still just makes me so happy, because I am a big sucker for that sound.
So before we go, is there a place you prefer for people to get the book? Is there an ideal spot that you'd rather people buy the book from?
So this is really complicated, right? Because, as you know, selling things to people is so awkward. Like, the reason I make a podcast is because I don't have to sell shit. I don't have to sell anything to anyone, and I like it that way. And so doing this has been horrible for me, because I'm like, it's the $35 with shipping. And it's so painful for me just to type that out. And this is something that I spent like 5 years on. You know what I mean? And like, I'm asking for $35. That includes shipping. It's really painful. So there's a few ways. The publisher is called Earth Island Books. They're in the UK. They put out books mostly about punk and hardcore. Another one of their big books they have right now is the autobiography of Charlie Harper from the UK Subs. Like they do music books about punk and hardcore, and they're really cool. It's a teeny tiny little organization, very few employees, and they put out these beautiful books. And they also put out albums. And so you can get it from them, and the shipping around the world is a little costly if you buy it directly from the publisher, but it cuts out distributors, it cuts out the middleman. And so whatever is the cheapest way you can get it, if money is like a big deal, then absolutely, if you want it, buy it the cheapest way you can find it. If you're in the US, you can email me. My email is just my name, Greg Soden at gmail.com, or propagandipod@gmail.com. You can just email me and say, hey, can we work something out to get the book? And I will see what I can do. Because I have some copies, but I have some events coming up where I'm going to appear in person, and hopefully sign some and sell some in person. So buying from the publisher is awesome because they put a lot of energy and time into this. But I realize that the shipping from England can be difficult, especially now that there is all these tariffs. And it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble's website. If you're around the world, it's got an ISBN number, like it's a real book. You can order it. If you're in Canada, you can order it through McNally Robinson. If you are, if you need to brainstorm ways to get it, please just email me, because I reply to everybody, and I have been selling them directly to people with Venmo and PayPal, and just packing them up myself, and signing them and writing notes inside the cover to people who want to buy one directly from me. So there are ways to do it, and if you want one, let me know. I also am working on having a stash of them in Canada that we can mail within Canada from my co-host's house, because he lives in Ontario. So we're working on having some better options available for inside Canada, but as well. But those are just a couple of ways you can do it for the moment.
Nice. All right, great. Greg, thank you so much for talking with me, and thank you so much for all the work you put into studying, getting a PhD in Propagandhi, both for your podcast and for this book.
Well, and I get to see them twice this weekend in Toronto. I'm going on Friday night and Saturday night at the concert hall, so this is Propagandhi week for me. So I am extremely excited at the moment, and just talking about these songs in a new format, being interviewed, it's somebody asking me about them, and having to think on the fly. This has excited me again for this upcoming weekend. So I appreciate your time, Aaron, and thanks for the invite.
Nice.